Welcome to the Education Innovators Podcast. I'm Eric Byron, and it is my privilege to host this show where we get to talk to folks from all over the world who are education thought leaders and innovators. We are going to hear inspiring stories from educators and edtech founders and AI experts and others who are fearlessly innovating and delivering unique learning experiences. I'm glad you're here. Let's get started. Today's guest is Alicia Hughes. She's an expert in virtual schooling and a champion for the importance of relationships.
But they're still having their students and staff just working in isolation. They're still using that model that you and I had when we took those courses, where they think, okay, I'm just going to give it to the people and let them do it when they want. And that never works. It doesn't. We as humans, we need the connection and we need the collaboration. And so that's the low-hanging fruit.
Alicia takes us through some of what she has learned teaching and leading virtual schools, and how, with the right culture, students and teachers can feel even more connected in a virtual school than in a traditional brick and mortar school. Welcome to the Education Innovators Podcast. I'm Eric Byron, and today I have with me Alicia Hughes. So she has over 20 years experience in the world of education and began her journey as a middle school social studies teacher in Charleston, South Carolina. After a little break, she came back as a high school social studies teacher, this time in a virtual school setting, and then really progressed through the ranks of leadership until after 14 years there, she ended up as the executive director of the school. But this year, 2024, she began a consulting business, Sparking Up Leadership. And she's on a mission to help schools, virtual schools, improve their culture, their best practices, and performance metrics. So welcome to the show, Alicia.
Well, thank you, Eric, for having me. I'm excited to be here and share my journey and talk to you about ways that we can improve the virtual space for our students and staff.
Yeah. Well, we're all about innovation here. And it sounds like you have been doing some creative things because, well, honestly, I mean, just to set the stage. So for me, when you say virtual, right, I'm thinking of online, right? And online for a lot of us is not the preferred method. This is something we kind of do when we can't do in person. And so I'm very interested in your perspective here because you seem to have conquered this. You have figured out how to do virtual school really well. So it's not only just an adequate alternative, I think you're going to tell us it can be even better than traditional face-to-face school. So start us out here. How did you get into this? You came back after taking care of your kids when they were young, right? You took a little break and then you came back and you ended up in this virtual school. So tell me about this experience. You got onboarded as a virtual teacher. Was there training? Did they prepare you for this? How did that go?
So when I started, it was 2010. So we are talking long before COVID and the pandemic. Most people think virtual education sort of started a few years ago, and that's not the case. So it was 2010. And yes, I had just had a few babies and decided I needed to go back into the classroom, but was looking for something that would allow me to still be with my children, yet fulfill that need, that calling to be an educator. And so I did a Google search in the virtual space and stumbled upon a high school social studies position at a virtual school. And no idea what that meant, Eric. I was like, what is this? A place where students don't have to go to school and I'm going to teach from right here in this very office where I'm sitting today. So I applied, got the position, and showed up on day one with very little knowledge about what this would be like. So yes, to answer your question, there was training. And the training, honestly, is much like any virtual training that you would have today, where there were modules. You logged into a website and you went through some modules. You learned how to log into different systems and platforms, and there was videos and you would watch. But what happened at that particular school was we knew that it had to be more than just working in isolation. So yes, I did my initial training here, right here by myself, clicking, logging, watching, all of those things. Then there was a face-to-face component, which was crucial to building those relationships and understanding and knowledge base. And so we have a main office. I would travel there to do some of the training, but we would do trainings just like you and I are talking today,
Mhm.
where we were live together working through problems and situations in a group setting. And
Yeah.
so that started my journey. And then, like you said, I quickly rose up the ranks. The entire time, all 14 years, we knew the power of connection and relationships. And we knew we had to do so virtually, which is different than in the brick and mortar world. And that became an emphasis for everything that we did from the start right up until where the school is today.
Yeah. So this still fascinates me because my experience with virtual schooling is so contradictory to what you seem to be describing.
Yeah.
I did a
Yeah.
master's online, completely online, and there was no relationships, there was no interaction. It was basically total isolation. You logged in once a week to get a lecture that was basically done through email, and yeah, and you had to be on, you didn't have to be online at any particular time. You just had to, check messages and, respond to stuff and get your work done. And you never met another student. You never met the instructor. It was complete isolation. Anyway, you clearly have figured out how to do this much, much better than that. So how do you, part of what confuses me here is I don't think that this whole idea of relationships and this culture, right, is about technology. I'm a tech guy, right? But I don't think this is about technology. I think it's really more about culture. And so, first of all, would you agree with that? And how does one create a culture that prioritizes relationships in a virtual school?
You are correct, Eric. Of course, you have to have tools, technological tools to build the relationships. And like you, one of my first experiences virtually was through a college course that I took to get recertified. And this was probably 20 years ago and very similar. Got some emails, click here, write a little paper, send it back, maybe watch a video. But 20 years ago, I'm not even sure we were we were doing that kind of stuff online. So it was very much in isolation, but the tools were there. And so we take those tools and we use them to build the relationship. So there are so many options, like what you and I are doing right now. Instead of sending an email to someone to say, hey, do X, Y, and Z, and here, answers to common questions, it's far better to have this kind of conversation, right? And so we prioritized live virtual conversations. Um, very early on, we put in a mandate that webcam should always be on. Have you ever been in a Zoom meeting, Eric, where people have their cameras off and you're talking and you don't know, are they there? Are they reacting? Are they happy, sad, mad? What's going on behind that screen? And so that was one of the early mandates that we need to see each other.
Right.
And we have Slack channels and text message chains and all of those things using the tools that we have to build relationships, to focus more on connecting and not just here's a list of to dos, get them done whenever you feel like getting them done.
Yeah. So when we talk about relationships here, I think you're talking beyond just teacher student relationships, right? This is also teacher to teacher and teacher to administration, right? Staff. So how do you manage all of that though? Because everybody's got their own schedule and priorities, and I've got class now. And right, so how do you do that?
Well, there were some things that are required and some things that were optional and some things that, you had no choice, but you were going to do it on this day at this time in this way. Much like traditional school or even a traditional workplace, you're going to have times where you're working by yourself. So let's use brick and mortar classroom. You go into the building, you walk in together, you're talking on the way in, you go to the teacher's lounge, you get your papers out of your mailbox, maybe you make some copies, maybe you talk to someone in the front office, and then you go into your classroom and you work for a set period of time with your students. And then maybe you have planning and the same thing happens. You go out, you talk to people, you have meetings perhaps, then go back in your classroom. And so we tried to emulate that schedule within our virtual space. So there are times that are protected for teachers. You're going to work with your students at this time. You're going to teach a lesson at this time. But then there were times that were walk in during the morning hours time, leave at the end of the day time, break in the middle, lunchtime. And those hours we would use for department meetings, grade level meetings, whole staff meetings. We would do fun things either at the beginning or the end of the day. So, some coffee talks. We would have a setting like this. Those were the optional, where people could come in and just talk and get to know each other. We would have lunch and learns in the middle of the day where we would do some professional development or share information that was necessary. So again, a combination of optional, what I like to call like the walking into the building, walking out of the building. If you need to have those connections while you're, starting or ending your day, we provided those spaces. And then mandatory. So those meetings like the departments and the whole staff meetings that were sprinkled in throughout the week.
Yeah. So the other thing that occurs to me, so I've been in a lot of meetings and I worked from home, right, for well, 12 years now, pretty much, right? So I'm very familiar with doing the virtual meeting thing. But one of the most frustrating things, though, can be if meetings aren't productive, right? If I'm not finding value in this and you've made me log on and get my camera on and I'm sitting there trying to look like I could care, but, you know, I don't see anything relevant to me here. So why am I doing this when I could be grading papers or planning my next lesson or hunting down that student who seems completely checked out to find out why. So how do you make sure that that time is really valuable time and the teachers are going to want to engage in that way?
And isn't that isn't that something that's common no matter where you are, no matter the setting, right?
Yeah,
Like I'm
yeah,
thinking back to my days in the classroom at the brick and mortar school and staying after school and sitting there in the meeting and the principal chatting at us and me just doodling on my page. When is this going to be over? I just want to go home, right?
yeah,
So I think, Eric, there's always that potential because it just happens everywhere and has happened. We knew that we could easily have too many meetings because of the flexibility of our space, right? You
right.
could just pop a meeting on someone's calendar. You didn't have to worry about, can they be there and what's happening at that time. So we worked hard to have agendas that were very specific to the meeting. We had times on those agendas to say, we're going to talk about this for 10 minutes. We're going to do this for 15. We worked within those meetings to be productive. So not just one person talking, everybody listening and, sitting like this, but with platforms and ways that people could share ideas, whether it was Google Docs or Padlets or Trello boards, so that they were participating in the meeting and not just sitting and listening. Were we perfect at it? No, we weren't. There were plenty of meetings where I was sitting there going, this could have been an email. Oh my gosh, this could have been an email. Or this could have been a recording that we pushed out in advance and then had questions. And we got better at that over the years, Eric, in that we would share information asynchronously and then follow up with something like this that was optional to say, if you have questions after watching and reading,
Yeah.
pop in and we'll chat about it. Or if you want to work together on this project, we'll be here at this time in this location. So it intentionality and having a purpose and sticking to agendas were ways that we were successful with that.
Yeah. So clearly you feel like you came up with something magical because you've
Mhm.
set out now in a consultancy to share what you've learned. You think you can help some of these schools. So without giving away the secret sauce, can you share with me a little bit about what you think is, like you go into a school, what are some of the, really low hanging fruit? You need to do these things and you need to do them, every day or every week.
So I started this because of COVID, in that I was sitting again right in this very spot, and my children, my two oldest children, were suddenly at home with me. We were all in this house, and I was listening to what was going on out there being done very poorly and watching my children turning off the webcam and carrying their laptops around the house, doing 100 other things, not engaged. I watched my child Googling answers on tests that, she should not have been doing. And
Yeah.
so I was watching all the bad practices and I thought, oh my goodness, this there's a need here to help people understand how to do this well. But then we returned to air quotes normal, and people started returning to the classrooms, and there weren't as many virtual schools, but there still were some. And so I started to engage with them, and I was seeing things that I was like, why are they doing it that way? Why are they making things so much more complicated? Why, are they not focused on culture and relationships? And so this idea started 4 years ago. It took me some time to build up too. But I will say the low hanging fruit is focusing on relationships. What I've seen time and again, Eric, are the technology pieces that you mentioned earlier. They're there, they're in place. They're great. They've got all their things ready. They've got their curriculum. They've got their channels for communication and their emails and their Zooms and all of those things. They've got them, but they're still having their students and staff just working in isolation. They're still using that model that you and I had when we took those
Yeah.
courses, where they think, okay, we're just going to give it to the people and let them do it when they want. And that never works. It doesn't. We as humans, we need the connection and we need the collaboration. And so that's the low hanging fruit, is showing leaders that relationships are still just as important in the virtual space as they are right here in your local school. And so, how to do that, the different ways that we did that with different initiatives and different requirements and different processes. Those are the things that I can share.
Yeah. Now, the other aspect I think of this, and we'll get into some, well, hopefully some metrics in a minute here, because I know that's part of this whole process is you got to measure what you're doing and have some kind of clear definition of success. But this was also a charter school, which means, right, that you had a little more freedom to do things differently than they're done in a regular public school. So, and I heard in one of your talks, I listened to a couple of podcasts you've been on, and you talked about how you did more personalization as well, letting kids learn more at their own pace, whether that was accelerated or a little behind. So how, because that's a whole completely different dynamic than just being online and being virtual, but being able to tailor the curriculum to the individuals. So tell me a little
Mhm.
bit about that and how you guys did that as a virtual school.
So we had, when I left, over 6,000 students. We were the largest public school in the state, 6,000 students. And every one of them came to the school because where they were wasn't working for them. So they chose, 6,000 students chose to come to our school. And the reasons they chose were varied, right? Again, some people wanted to excel and work at a quicker pace. Others were really far behind and needed help catching up and didn't feel like the local school was
Sorry,
doing that for
and
them.
6,000 is not just high school, is it?
K-12,
Oh,
K-12. There was
K-12.
about
Okay.
3,000 in the high school. So about half the school
Oh, okay.
was high school aged, but we were a K-12 school. And so that is why relationships were so important, Eric. We needed our staff to understand why the child chose the school, or the parents of the child chose the school. And then how we could take the requirements of the state, because we were still a public school, so they still had to do the English, the math, the science, the social studies, and meet graduation requirements. But how can we help them exactly where they were to meet their goals? And so it really was super individualized. And we did that by assigning each student, we called them homeroom teachers, but someone that was looking out for that child. And that caseload was about 30, give or take, students. And that was that staff member's job, to find out the why for the student and their goals, and then tailor the curriculum, the instruction to that unique child. Now, the majority were essentially in about the same spot, right? They would come in, they were all about right here where they should be, maybe a little bit ahead, maybe a little bit behind, but it wasn't as big of a gap as you might be imagining, right? Like, you might be thinking of 6,000 kids that are just spread all over. So the majority of the kids were falling right where they should be. And then the more advanced, or the ones that were behind, we had special teachers to help them, to either get them caught up or help them with their acceleration. And so we really, again, first met with them to find out what it is they needed, what were their goals, and then place them accordingly.
Yeah. So any themes to what they were dissatisfied with or what was missing that they were hoping to get in virtual school?
There was a lot of misconception at first in that I'm just going to get to come in here, click my way through, and get my high school diploma. And this is just going to be cake and it's going to be easy. And I'm not going to have to talk to anybody. And so that misconception was frustrating for some when they expected to come in and not have to do much and be rewarded at the end. Another misconception was that they did not ever have to leave their home. And because we were a public school, there were state testing requirements and other requirements that you had to come and you had to engage with our staff. And so that left some people frustrated. There were some that wanted a very full engagement, meaning they wanted to be able to constantly engage with staff. And again, with 6,000 students and a staff of 260, yes, we offered lots of opportunities to connect like this, but we certainly couldn't connect with a student one-on-one for 8 hours a day, a
Yeah.
typical school day. So misconceptions were our biggest challenge in the beginning, but as we grew and as we became more clear in our processes with enrollment and being transparent in what the day would look like and info sessions, those went away. We still had frustrations around, I'd like to be able to engage more. I'd like more opportunities for face-to-face connections. And that was something we were working on when I left, was to build more face-to-face opportunities and connections for our families.
Yeah. So what about things like sports and clubs and stuff, right? That's harder to do virtually.
It is. I will say I can't remember the year, but I'll say 10 years ago, the state of South Carolina passed a law that if there was something not offered at your charter school, because charter isn't just virtual, obviously. So if there was something not offered at your charter school, you had to be allowed to at least try out at the school in which you are zoned. And
Mm.
so that applies to sports most commonly, but things like marching band, ROTC, those were permissible as well. And I will tell you, Eric, in the beginning, some of the local schools were really mad about that, right? Like, oh, I got to let this kid come in and try out who doesn't even go here. How am I going to discipline them if they get in trouble? How am I going to hold them accountable for practice if I don't have to worry about their grades? And so there was pushback in the beginning. But then it was discovered that a lot of really great athletes and dancers and musicians were coming here because of the flexibility. They wanted to be able to practice their golf game during the daylight hours and then do their homework at night. They wanted to be able to travel with their ballet company and work from wherever they wanted. And so the schools quickly saw, oh, if we can have that child on our golf team, on our baseball team, performing in our dramatic performance, why would we not give them that opportunity? So that was a great win for charter schools in general. Clubs, we do have a lot of virtual clubs. What's taken off was esports, that gaming, the gaming
Yeah.
that became huge in recent years. And I remember a few years ago, our team won like all kinds of state championships and state tournaments. So clubs such as anything virtual can be done. We have a chess club, book clubs, all of those things we could do virtually. But the sports, the athletics, the marching bands, obviously you can't do virtually, but they were
Mm.
permitted to do so at their local schools.
It's great. All right. So let's talk about metrics. So how did you measure success and maybe distinct for a virtual school from a traditional public school? What kind of metrics were you looking at that were different?
Well, first and foremost, the metric we looked at most often in the early days was retention, right? Because people are choosing our school. They're not just zoned, they don't just get a bus that picks them up and brings them. And so we wanted to keep our students when they got there because just like any institution, the training piece, right? This is how you log in, this is how you connect with teachers, this is how you're expected to act. And so that constant turnover was hurting us, because even like I talked to you about, we had 30 kids that we want the staff to really know. Well, when you're losing a kid that you just got to know and another one comes in, it's just time. And so that was the first metric we really focused on. Let's retain our kids so that we can have success. And so that, in the early days, I will tell you, whew, it was again a revolving door, constant, and it was tough. But as we grew, our retention rate continued to grow. And so we eventually went to a point where we're like, we can't grow anymore. So we instituted a cap on enrollment. And we met that cap every semester, where we were shutting our doors, our virtual doors. And again, that really helped us. So that was the first metric. But then again, I'll go back to, we were a public school just like all others, with a state report card and with expectations of the state. So things like graduation rate, state test participation, college and career readiness, all of those things, we were measured in exactly the same way as the local brick and mortar school, which frustrated us sometimes to no end, in that the metrics were the same, even though the delivery was very different. But at the end of the day, we knew what we had to do. It was for the betterment of students. And so we began to focus on those. So graduation rate, when I started, we were at, I think, 33%, embarrassed to say 33%. By the time I left, we were at 90%. And so again, just looking at those metrics that we had to do anyway, that became the focus after relationships and retention were conquered. Then we're like, okay, now we've got to move these things up, move up these metrics the state is requiring us to do.
All right. So give me some specific things you did to, well, first to improve retention. I mean, it's one thing to put your attention on it. It's another thing to actually do something, right? So what did you do that improved retention, and what did you do that improved graduation rates?
So retention was, again, I know I sound like I'm beating a dead horse here. Relationship, right? Like saying you can't just come here and not log in and not engage with our staff. So we're going to make sure we have this relationship base, because that's what was happening, Eric. And actually, the retention piece does touch on graduation, right? When a kid just logs in, they come here and then they don't do anything and they disappear, and we don't know where they went to. Well, that hurts our graduation rate. That hurts everything. So relationships were key with the retention piece, but then asking for feedback from the families. What would make you stay? Surveying, questioning, exit interviews when they were saying they were going to leave. What is it, something that we can control, or is this, you are moving out of the state, you are, you were only going to come here temporarily to fix a need, and now that need has been fixed. And so taking that feedback, offering those face-to-face opportunities was huge in the early days. And South Carolina is I'd call it a medium-sized state, right? So it's not so large that we couldn't have events and opportunities to engage at several locations around the state, so that families could get, if they wanted it, that face-to-face component that they were missing. So again, listening to families, offering, it's not hybrid, but opportunities for engagement, that was key. And then being transparent, like I said, just looking at our enrollment practices and going, well, these people are coming here thinking one thing, finding out something else, and leaving. So why don't we just tell them before they get here, and we put in this time and effort, what they should expect, and then we'd have a better chance of keeping them. And so that came into play as well, really tightening up our enrollment processes and procedures and communication and marketing, to be open and honest and transparent with those that were considering us.
Yeah.
So
No,
that is enrollment.
yeah, makes
Graduation
sense.
rate.
Yeah. Go ahead.
Graduation rate was, that was very multifaceted. That was all hands on deck, right? So it wasn't just, Eric doesn't know how to do algebra, let's just pour into Eric and algebra. It was, again, tailoring every decision for the students to where they were. So we had a lot of kids come in, especially early on, that were really behind in graduation. They were in their third year of high school, but basically only had 5 or 6 credits, right? Really, really far behind. And so working to look at where they were, coming up with a plan to say, okay, you're this far behind. You're going to have to do summer school. You're going to have to take 6 courses next semester as opposed to 5. You're going to have to double up on this. And making unique plans for every child. That was the key. And again, that was all hands on deck. That was that homeroom teacher I talked about, the counseling team, administrators, revamping the way we did summer school. So going back to the unique needs, individualizing for every single child, that's what helped us move the graduation rate. And then the retention piece, Eric, because if they leave, if they come here as a 17-year-old and go, this is not for me, and they drop out, well, that's a ding in our graduation rate. So ensuring that when we get them, we know where they are, what they need, and build that relationship to keep them here.
Yeah. Very good. I mean, it's not rocket science really, and I love your emphasis on relationships. I've been in tech for decades, a long time, 30 plus years, and a lot of people have always found my style kind of odd in a tech world because I've always said it's about people. It's not about the technology. You want to run a great tech department, you know, focus on the people, and the tech is the easy part. Good people, and right, you can have a conversation with them, and again, yes, where they are, and if they're unhappy, you have an opportunity to fix it if you're paying attention and you have a relationship with them. But if you don't have a relationship with them, they just go poof, and now
Yep.
you're trying to onboard somebody else, right? Yeah.
Yes.
Yep.
Yes.
So okay, no, this all makes a lot of sense. Let's go back again a little bit to again, my focus is innovation, right? So how much autonomy did you have? I know you had to hit certain standards, but in the curriculum, how much did you guys modify the way material was presented in order? So like if you've got somebody who's way behind, right, you've really got to accelerate their pace. But I'm thinking about it. I'm going, well, there's probably a reason why they're way behind, right? So you've got to overcome
Mhm.
what was keeping them from even keeping up, and you got to get them to go even faster than they probably should.
Mhm.
So what's the magic there that you could do in a charter school that you couldn't do in a public school?
I think well, I know it was the flexibility of the program, right? So in a traditional school, you have 30 kids, give or take, in your classroom. They sit down, you're teaching to all 30, and then maybe you do pull outs for the kids that are behind or not getting it. And so your time is split. The flexibility of our school allowed for a teacher to say, okay, I've got 30 kids. These 20 are on track and doing well. I'm going to teach to them at this time on this day. But I can see Eric is really far behind. And so I'm going to do a one on one with Eric. And every day I'm going to schedule with Eric at 11 a.m. Every day we're going to meet for 15 minutes and I'm going to go through and really make sure Eric understands and then give some goals and some benchmarks and really tailor it just to Eric. And then Alicia is even further behind than Eric. So I'm going to meet with Alicia at 11:15 and I'm going to go do the same thing and really tailor it to where Alicia needs. Modifying assignments again, this works for all 20 kids in my class. So I'm going to just let them do it as is. But ooh, I don't think Alicia's going to be able to handle that. So we're just going to take away part one and part three and really focus on part two because that's where Alicia needs the most help. And parts one and part three aren't as, critical to her understanding. They're just kind of enrichment. And so again, there was ways to drop, there was ways to add, there was ways to modify for each child. Once identified as, okay, these kids got it, boom, just go. This one needs a little more assistance. And what we found too was great. We would see them moving uh, in and out of different levels of support, right? So we might get you right where you need to be, Eric, and you're back in track and you're doing everything great, and then little bump in the road, and oh, Eric's back. Okay, let's get
Yeah.
Eric back in on these one-on-ones to make sure he doesn't, fall even further back. Or we might say Eric is now back where he is, and oh my gosh, he's so excited that he understood this. Now he's like, starting to accelerate through. So it really it was a constant up and down revolving door of students that sometimes needed support, sometimes didn't. But the beauty of virtual is that weeks and days could be tailored to the needs of the students. There wasn't that set schedule of, you're teaching first period from 9 to 10 and second from 10 to 11, and you can only meet with kids one on one within those confines.
Yeah. So scheduling was a lot more flexible.
Mm,
What about the
yes.
length of sessions, right? So I mean, typical high school classroom is what, an hour, hour and a half, something like that.
And yeah, and again, that was also dependent on the subject, the material, days of the week, what they had, what they were preparing for. So it was just very varied. But again, yeah, typically an hour for high school, 30 minutes for elementary.
So actually, one of my previous guests, Serena Sachs Mandel, she's the CIO for, sorry, the CTO for education, global CTO for education for Microsoft. And she was the CIO for Florida Virtual Schools
Mm.
before this assignment. And she made a comment at one point during our conversation on the podcast that her own kids went through virtual school at one point, and they said that their relationship with their teachers was better in the virtual school than it was in the traditional school. So I still struggle a little bit with this because it, it just seems so odd to me because you hear so much counter to this, right? Everybody just whines and complains. Oh my God, and COVID did a lot
Mhm.
of damage to people's psyche
It did.
around
It did.
this. So so how do you explain that sentiment when a kid says, "Oh, my relationship with my teachers is better in a virtual school than it was, in a traditional school?"
Well, and I think technology has come so far to allow for that because, again, Eric, you are way across the world from me right now, right? Like you are literally on the other side of the world. And yet we are having a very robust conversation, looking each other in the eye, able to engage with each other. And when this ends, I will feel like, oh, I could talk to Eric about other things. I could, if I have a need, I could email him and get in touch with him and we could set another one of these. This allows for that one-on-one opportunity more so than in a brick and mortar school because very few educators have this, in a classroom and in a school, this, right?
Yeah.
They could be sitting with you, tutoring you at lunchtime or on their planning period or working with you, but someone's going to come in the room. There's going to be a fire drill. There's going to be a fight in the cafeteria. Something's going to happen to pull an educator away, no matter how much they try to protect their time. And if they do get a block of time, 30 minutes with you on, before school, after school, that's 30 minutes, maybe one time. Maybe you get it a couple times a month.
Yeah.
But this can be set up when needed almost as much as a student asks and requires it. And again, you might think, well, Alicia, there were 6,000 students, 260 staff members. How can they? No, not every student needed it or wanted it or craved it. But those that did could get it and get it frequently and consistently without distraction and really build those relationships. So that's why I think you hear that. And I'm not surprised by that experience at Florida Virtual because we've heard that for years. I've heard that for 14 years. I've kept them in a little file in my Google Drive, just email after email after email. Your staff changed the life of my child. Your staff cared more for my child than ever in their 10 years at the public school, whatever. We heard that again and again and again and again because of this, because of the ability to really sit and be engaged with a child distracted free.
Yeah. How about managing? Well, you moved up into the leadership ranks here, teacher, manager, and then assistant principal, executive director. How do you work with the faculty, right? So, I mean, teachers come in all shapes and sizes and strengths and weaknesses. How did you weed out the ones who really didn't get it? And yeah,
Yeah. Yep. So again, when I started or I call it like the wild, wild west, right? Again, we were all just here. You log in, grade your papers, answer your emails, do a lesson, shut your laptop, you're done for the day. That was the culture when I first started. And there were some educators that came on board because they're like, this is great. I don't have to do lunch duty and car rider line, and I can just sit and grade my papers and be done after a few hours. That sounds wonderful. And so it was getting people to understand and drink the Kool-Aid at first. And then, like you said, to say, okay, well, these are the expectations. If you can't meet them, this isn't the place for you. And that was a process, Eric. That was not something that happened overnight. It was building, it was, starting to spread that message and to set those policies and procedures and expectations, and then hold people accountable when they didn't meet them. And very quickly, and we didn't lose a lot, but very quickly there were people that said, okay, this is not for me anymore. This is getting a little too serious over here.
Yeah.
I can't do this anymore. And so we lost a few for sure. But then I'll say it again, it came back to open and honest transparency during the hiring process. Really letting people know in interviews and when offers were made, this is what a day looks like for you. These are the expectations here. You're not going to come in here and just answer a few emails and then put your feet up the rest of the day. And you're going to actually work for these 8 hours and work with kids and engage and be part of a staff. And so that allowed us to hire the best. It really did, because we could know very quickly, okay, this person is not here for the right reasons. We always ask this interview question, why do you want to work at this virtual school? And if anyone ever said, well, I really like working in my pajamas, we'd be like, okay, we're going to weed them out.
And thank you for playing, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. No, that's good. I won't tell you that I'm in my pajamas at the moment, but it's all right.
Yeah, I won't
put a
stand up,
shirt on
Eric. I
for you.
know. Yep. I used to have what I would call an interview shirt. Maybe I shouldn't say this. Maybe you can edit this out.
Yeah,
I don't know.
no,
It
no.
was hanging on a
I
hook
got
right
you.
over there. And I'd go to get on an interview and I'd have to look professional. I'd earrings sitting on my desk, earrings on,
Yep.
interview shirt on. Okay, I'm ready.
Uh,
I didn't care what people worked in, but they needed to know that they did have to actually work.
yeah. Well, my excuse is it is nighttime here. So
It is, yes. And my excuse could have been I just woke up, but it's 9:47 a.m., so
yeah,
I can't use that.
it's all right. It's okay. God, I had another thing I was going to ask you there, and I got joking around.
I know, leadership.
Yeah, leadership. Yeah, finding the right people, managing those people. It's all, there's so many similarities. I come mostly from the corporate world. So I, worked during the day and I taught at night. So I did the adjunct thing. And for me, it was just pure pleasure. I didn't teach for the money. I taught for the joy. And,
Yeah.
it was great. And I learned so much by teaching that was a reward in and of itself, right? Because,
Mhm.
I learned very quickly that you think you know something till you have to explain it to somebody else.
Yeah.
Then you realize,
Yes.
oh, my understanding this may not be as clear as I think it is.
For sure.
Yeah. So yes, that's kind of how I got into this. But so AI and generative AI, Chat GPT. So this is, well, it's an interesting, kind of dichotomy, if you will, right now. We've got a bunch of
Yes.
proponents of it, and everybody thinks, oh, this is
Oh,
going to
yes.
change the world. And then we've got, a bunch of teachers who are just like, oh my God, this is cheating, ban it, keep it out of the classrooms. In the virtual world, though, virtual schooling, it's really hard, I would think, to try and keep it out. So how are you embracing it? How do you deal with this phenomenon now?
So we have been dealing with the cheating, the plagiarism, probably on a larger scale than most due to our nature, right?
Yep.
From the start. And I would always say this because I would have some staff members that would be like, this kid's cheating. I know he copied and pasted this from Google. This kid's, I know that when he was taking the algebra test, he was just over there, looking up answers online. And so we did have systems in place that would catch it. We had programs. One was called Check My Work that, students had to run their papers through and it would spit it back out and say, 90% of this was found on the internet. And so there was a policy and there was a process we put them through when we discovered that. But I say this, maybe this is unpopular. Learning is learning. And so if you're going to put something into Chat GPT, probably we'll be able to catch it through Check My Work or just those weird words that Chat GPT tends to tends to put out there that we know kids aren't really using, and we'll be like, that sounds like, something you didn't write. So there are flags that we would be able to tell and put them through our plagiarism and academic dishonesty policy. But most kids, when they're Googling or now using AI, look at it, read it, modify it, change it. Okay, oh, I'm going to get caught if I just copy and paste and plug in. So let me take, okay, I'm going to read this whole thing that it spit out. Now I'm going to modify it. To me, that's still learning, right? That is still learning. You have read the information. You, first of all, I had to come up with a good prompt so that it answers
Right.
you properly. And then you've taken it, you've edited it. You have learned through that process. There are people that would disagree with me on that, right? And so I think saying no and we're going to stop it, you're not going to stop it. You're never going to stop it ever. It's right there at their literal fingertips. So recognizing it's going to happen, teaching the best ways to use it, letting students know copy and pasting, that's never going to be the way, and helping them understand the tools that will assist them. I mean, there are some great opportunities to help them with their learning and take some things off teachers' plates. So let's embrace it, use it for the positives, help kids understand the negatives and what not to do, and weave it into the part of the conversation as opposed to going, no, we can't, we can't, we can't.
Yeah. Well, I'm so glad to hear you say that because I'm in the camp of, yes, they can cheat if they want to cheat. And,
Absolutely.
unfortunately, AI detectors simply don't work. You get into a real danger zone
Mm-hmm.
there with accusing someone of
Mm-hmm.
cheating based on an AI detector. And,
Absolutely.
it's hit or miss whether it's accurate or not. And,
Mhm.
so many have demonstrated that, you can write something completely yourself. In fact, I just had a call last night with somebody else I recorded with, and he's an AI consultant for schools now. And his advice was, if you're a teacher thinking about using one of these tools, take some of your own writing and put it in the tool and see how you feel about the response you get.
Yeah.
He took something he wrote 10 years ago and put it in there, and it came back like 80 or 100%. This is AI. He was like,
Yeah.
okay, so, how would you feel if somebody accused you of cheating, right, for something you wrote 100%, right? So,
Mhm.
and it's all about relationships, right? Once you do that, once you accuse a kid of cheating on something they didn't cheat on, you're done.
Oh,
I mean, how do you come
yes.
back from it? Yeah.
Oh my gosh. And that was a lot of, once I got up to be principal and then executive director, I was dealing with a lot of the angry parents and the angry staff members who were mad. And
Yeah.
there was a lot of that even before AI, where they were running things through Check My Work and it was saying the kid plagiarized and then it hadn't. And they were doing Google searches and something would come back that would look similar and they would write the kid up. And I mean, I sat through a lot of those. And I would always say to the teacher, listen, again, maybe they did, maybe they didn't. But at the end of the day, use it as a learning opportunity. Just have a conversation. Hey, I found this on Check My Work. Why does it look similar? Tell me. Okay, can you just stop and explain how you came up with this answer then?
Yeah.
And that is what we always leaned into, just allowing the students the opportunity to explain.
Yeah.
And so I would say in the time of AI, if you think a kid did, say, hey, this looks like something AI might have written. Can you just explain it to me verbally? Can you just go through and tell me your thought process? And if they can, well, isn't that what you wanted them to do in the first place? So,
Yeah. All right. What do you see changing? So things are constantly changing. Obviously, the AI
mhm.
stuff is affecting a lot of things, but what else do you see as you're, now consulting with schools on trying to improve? Where do you think this will be in another 2 years, 3 years?
I think and hope that every teacher, regardless of fully virtual, hybrid, brick and mortar, is embracing all the tools available. There are so many tools out there, Eric. There are so many ways we can help students learn, so many products and systems that they can use, that every educator is tailoring instruction to the unique needs of every one of their students. And I know that's scary, especially for my brick and mortar friends who are like, you want me to do 30 different lesson plans you want me to teach, but what we have now allows for that. If we start them everybody's doing benchmark testing. So look at their benchmark test and see where the student is, and then find the platform, the opportunities to help them where they are. And you're more facilitating and assisting them in the moment. That's my hope. And that's where I think we have to go. We can't just give a kid a textbook anymore and say, let's all start on page 1. We're all just going to work through together. And at the end, we're going to have a quiz. And then we're going to go to number 2. And we're going to do the same thing over and over. That's not working. That's not working. So if we can take the tools at our disposal, no matter where you're teaching, and really tailor everything and use those tools, AI too, to help advanced education, I think that'll be a game changer.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, this has been great. Is there anything else you wanted to talk about that we haven't covered?
I do not think so. I think you allow me to say things that I'm passionate about and knowledgeable on. And so if anyone needs assistance in that space, I am here to help.
Yes, absolutely. And we will put your contact information in the show notes. And yeah, anything else you want me to put in the show notes? Send me anything you've got you think would be of interest there, helpful to resources for folks. Okay.
Perfect.
All right. Well, thank you so much. All right. There's a lot to reflect on there from Alicia Hughes. She gave us some great advice, practical tips on working and schooling virtually. I hope you were taking notes because she covered some really fundamental stuff that sounds good and logical, but it's actually not very easy to implement. So if you need help with this, with creating that kind of culture that Alicia is talking about, where relationships are highly valued, please reach out to her. I know she wants to help. All right, let's face it. There's going to be another pandemic, right? This isn't a matter of if, it's just a matter of when. And we all need to be good at virtual work and virtual school. So, we need to learn from folks like Alicia, who has figured out how to do this effectively. Okay. If you're enjoying this podcast, and I certainly hope you are, please subscribe and share with others out there who may be interested and could benefit from the content here. We have more awesome guests lined up, more incredible stories of innovation and education. So you don't want to miss them. Hit that subscribe button. I'm Eric Byron. Thanks for listening to the Education Innovators podcast. And for all those education innovators out there, thanks for doing what you do. You are making a difference.